Something quiet has been happening beneath the surface of modern life, and you can hear it in the way men speak when they think no one is listening, not in grand declarations, not in public outrage, but in a private exhaustion that leaks into the smallest behaviors. The man who used to move forward now hesitates. The man who used to speak plainly now edits himself into softness. The man who once felt the clean hunger of desire now feels only the dull pressure of needing to be wanted. It rarely begins with a dramatic failure. It starts with a moment so ordinary it seems harmless. A late-night glance at a phone screen. A message he rereads 3 times before replying. The tiny calculation of tone. Too eager, too cold, too direct, too uncertain. He tells himself he is being thoughtful. He calls it emotional intelligence. But what is really happening is something older than the phone, older than the apps, older than modern dating etiquette. He has started to buy love with the only currency he has left, approval. You can see it in his posture as he waits for her reply. His shoulders settle forward as if gravity has increased. His eyes flick, hungry and ashamed, to the lock screen. A man can be surrounded by opportunity and still behave like a beggar if his inner economy has collapsed. He can be successful at work, disciplined in the gym, polite to strangers, and yet in the presence of a woman he desires, he becomes a negotiator, pleading for a treaty no one asked for. A man like this does not realize the trap because he is rewarded at first. She responds. She smiles. She calls him sweet, good, safe. He thinks these are compliments. He does not hear the funeral bell hidden inside them. Safety is not desired. Sweetness is not authority. Goodness without power becomes permission for others to define you. And then, quietly, the shift begins. Her replies are slow. The warmth becomes conditional. The attention becomes a faucet she controls, turning it on when he performs and off when he resists. He tells himself it is normal that she is busy. This is overthinking, that he should be patient, and patience, in his mind, becomes the moral disguise for cowardice. Men are withdrawing from women now, not always physically, but spiritually. They still date, still pursue, still try, but the pursuit is hollow. It is not driven by desire, it is driven by fear. Fear of losing her, fear of being alone, fear of being seen as inadequate. And fear has a smell. Women may not describe it in philosophical terms, but instinct recognizes it as a body recognizes spoiled food. There was a man I once spoke to who described his relationship as peaceful. He said it with pride, as if peace were always a virtue, but his eyes were tired and his voice had that faint, apologetic softness men develop when they have been training themselves to be harmless. He had not had a fundamental conflict in years, and he thought that meant he was mature. What it really meant was that he had not spoken the truth in years. He had been paying for calm with self-erasure. This is the invisible pattern. Approval-seeking men lose desire first in the woman and then in themselves. They lose it because desire requires tension, and tension requires a man who is willing to stand. A man who needs approval cannot stand. He kneels before he realizes he is. There is a philosopher who watched this dynamic long before smartphones, long before the attention economy, long before modern therapeutic language gave men new ways to excuse their surrender. Friedrich Nietzsche, sickly and solitary, walking through European streets with an eye sharpened by pain, understood something brutal about human nature. The most dangerous thing is not hatred, not conflict, not even suffering. The most dangerous thing is the slow internal agreement to live for someone else's validation. By the end of this, you will understand exactly why this keeps happening to you and what it quietly destroys if you ignore it. Nietzsche lived in a world where old gods were dying, where the moral architecture that once held Europe upright was cracking. He watched the modern man begin to replace faith with comfort, conviction with social permission, inner law with external applause. Nietzsche was not writing about dating apps or text messages, but about something that runs beneath them like a dark river. The transformation of the human being into a creature who measures himself by the reactions of others. He saw the rise of the herd, the collective morality that rewards compliance and punishes difference. He saw how men with strong instincts could be trained into timidity, and how the timid could then call their timidity virtue. He saw how weakness learns to moralize itself, to call itself good, to call itself kind, to call itself civilized. and he saw how this produces a particular kind of man, the man who is nice, not because he is powerful and chooses restraint, but because he is afraid and calls it character. Here is the brutal thesis that must become the spine of your understanding. A man who seeks approval as his primary currency becomes spiritually subordinate, and spiritual subordination is the death of desire. Not only her desire for him, but his desire for life. Because desire is not merely sexual, it is the force that makes a man build, risk, speak, challenge, and endure. Desire is will, and Nietzsche's entire philosophy is, at its core, a meditation on the will to power, not in the childish sense of domination, but in the more profound understanding of self-overcoming, of shaping life, rather than being shaped by it. Nietzsche wrote that he who has a reason to live can bear almost any how. That is not a motivational quote. It is a diagnosis. A man with a why does not bargain for approval. A man with a why can tolerate disapproval, rejection, misunderstanding, even loneliness, because his center of gravity is not located in another person's opinion. His life has an internal architecture. The walls hold. But the approval-seeking man lacks such a structure. His life is an open courtyard. Anyone can enter. Anyone can rearrange the furniture. He is not living, he is being lived. Watch how this plays out in modern scenarios that look innocent on the surface. A man meets a woman and feels that familiar electric pull. Instead of letting the attraction awaken his life, he makes it his life. His morning routine becomes a waiting room. His evenings become a theater of performance. He checks his phone with the hunger of someone who thinks salvation is arriving through pixels. When she takes longer to reply, he feels his nervous system tighten. He sends another message, then another, trying to clarify, be transparent, and show effort. He calls it communication, but it is actually a confession of dependency. Another man is in a relationship, and he senses a subtle shift. She is less affectionate. She seems distracted. He asks what is wrong, and she says, nothing. He accepts it, even though he knows something is wrong. He accepts it because his primary goal is not truth, it is harmony. He thinks harmony is love, but harmony without truth is simply the absence of confrontation. It is not intimacy, it is avoidance. Slowly, he learns that the quickest way to keep the peace is to silence himself. He becomes an expert at swallowing his own instincts. Another man is married. He works, provides, and behaves. He is praised as responsible, but he has no sovereignty over his own time. His boundaries are porous. He apologizes even when he is not wrong because he has learned that apologizing gives him temporary relief. He has become an accountant of emotional debt, constantly paying interest on a loan he never agreed to take. And one day, he realizes he has not felt genuinely desired in years. He blames her. He blames culture. He blames stress. He does not yet see the deeper mechanism. He trained her nervous system to associate him with negotiation, not with presence. Nietzsche would call this a form of decadence, not a moral insult, but a biological and spiritual condition. Decadence is what happens when an organism loses the courage to affirm itself, when it begins to organize its behavior around avoiding pain rather than pursuing greatness. The approval-seeking man is decadent in this sense. He has traded the risk of standing alone for the comfort of being liked. Nietzsche despised the morality that turns weakness into a badge, that teaches men to be ashamed of their strength, that calls assertiveness, firmness, ege, and boundaries, insecurity. He saw how societies can domesticate men, how they can breed a kind of human who is manageable, predictable, polite, safe, and he warned what this produces: the last man, the man who seeks comfort above all, who avoids conflict, who wants only to be left undisturbed, who says, "We have invented happiness," while his soul is quietly dying. In modern dating and relationships, the last man is often the approval seeker. He is not evil. He is not evil consciously weak. He is trained by a culture that sells him the idea that love is earned through compliance, that masculinity must be constantly justified. That desire is something a woman grants him if he behaves correctly. But desire is not a salary. It is not paid out to the obedient. It is a response to life force. And Nietzsche's lens is ruthless here. When you live as if your value must be confirmed from the outside, you become the kind of man who cannot inspire the outside to prove anything. Now we go inside the man's mind, where the real collapse occurs. because the collapse is not her fault. It is not even primarily cultural. Culture merely amplifies what is already latent. The collapse is an internal sequence, a machinery of self-abandonment that begins with a small, almost invisible decision. The decision to avoid discomfort by sacrificing truth. Phase 1 is numbness disguised as normality. The man tells himself everything is fine. He tells himself relationships are complicated. He describes himself as someone who should not overreact. He watches small acts of disrespect accumulate like dust and calls them not worth fighting over. He begins to live in a mild sedation. He still functions, still smiles, still works, perhaps still exercises, but his inner world has started to grow grey. In this stage, what he thinks is happening is maturity. He believes he is being patient, tolerant, and evolved. What is really happening, through Nietzsche's eyes, is that his will is being trained into passivity. He is learning to accept diminishment as the price of belonging. He is practicing self-denial, not for a higher purpose, but for approval. And Nietzsche would recognize this immediately as a form of slave morality, the morality of those who cannot impose their values on the world, so they adapt to it and call adaptation a virtue. Phase 2 is justification and self-negotiation. Now the man begins to rationalize what his instincts already know. He says, she didn't mean it. He says, she had a hard day. He says, if I bring it up, it will make things worse. He says, I'm not perfect either. He starts to speak about himself as if he were always on trial. He becomes his own prosecutor. This is the stage where he begins to bargain with his identity. He starts making minor changes to prevent friction. He avoids specific topics. He edits his humor. He softens his opinions. He delays his own plans to remain available. He cancels the gym because she might want to see him. He sleeps poorly because he is waiting for late-night replies. He tells himself these are sacrifices for love, but they are actually offerings on the altar of fear. In Nietzsche's language, he is shrinking his will to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. He is committing a slow form of self-murder and calling it devotion. Phase 3 is self-abandonment, the emotional kneeling. Now he starts to chase, not always physically, but energetically. He sends long messages explaining himself. He apologizes for things he does not believe he did wrong. He tries to preempt her disappointment by becoming smaller. He becomes hyper-attuned to her moods, like a servant watching a king's face for signs of displeasure. His nervous system becomes a radar. His life becomes a monitoring system. I work with men who do this even when they are outwardly competent. One man in his early 30s, high income, disciplined, respected at work, but in his relationship, he was constantly performing penance for imaginary crimes. If she was quiet, he assumed he had failed. If she was distant, he thought he needed to do more. He stopped seeing friends because she once said she felt unimportant when he went out. He began asking for permission for things that did not require it. The more he asked, the less she respected him, and the more he tried to earn back what he had lost by asking again. A feedback loop. A machine that eats a man alive. He told me, I'm just trying to make her feel secure. But what he was really doing was making himself insecure. He was outsourcing his inner stability to her reactions. He was teaching his psyche that peace exists only when she approves. And that is the definition of spiritual subordination. Nietzsche would say, you have replaced your internal law with external validation. You have become a man who needs permission to be himself, and the world does not respect men who ask permission to exist. Here is the cruel paradox. The approval-seeking man believes he is increasing intimacy by being accommodating. He thinks he is showing his love by prioritizing her. He believes he is preventing loss by surrendering. But what is really happening is that he is draining erotic polarity out of the relationship. Desire is not compatible with neediness. Desire wants a man who has weight, who has gravity, who has an axis. When a man begins to orbit a woman, he does not become more attractive. He becomes a satellite. And satellites do not inspire devotion. They inspire utility. There is a contrast I have seen too many times. A woman leaves the approval seeker and later pursues another man who, on the surface, looks similar. Similar age, similar social status, similar level of intelligence. The approval seeker watches this and feels betrayed by reality. He asks, why him? He is not even better than me. But the difference is not superficial. The difference is metaphysical. The man she later pursued did not need her approval to remain himself. He was not trying to purchase her desire, he was living from an internal command. He was not negotiating his identity. He was not asking the world for permission to want what he wanted. This is what women often call confidence, but that word is too small. What they are sensing is sovereignty, an inner kingdom with walls, a man who can lose her and remain whole. That wholeness creates tension, and tension creates desire. Nietzsche understood that the human being is always moving towards something. If you are not moving toward your own higher self, you will move towards someone else's approval, and the second path is always degrading. It turns you into a creature who cannot respect himself, and a man who cannot respect himself will never be respected by anyone else. Not consistently, not deeply, not in the way that matters. Now, zoom out, because this is not only a personal tragedy, it is a systemic one. The modern environment is engineered to exploit the approval-seeking tendency. Dating apps transform attraction into a marketplace where attention is currency and validation is a drug. Social media turns the female gaze into a public scoreboard and the male psyche into a performance engine. Public shaming becomes a weapon. HR policies and reputation economies turn flirting into risk management. False accusation risk, even when rare, becomes a psychological shadow that makes men hesitate. Divorce laws and custody dynamics create long-term stakes that amplify fear. The entire system teaches the man that the safest strategy is to be agreeable, careful, and constantly legible. But Nietzsche would ask a question most men avoid. Safe for what? Safe to remain average? Safe to avoid pain? Safe to avoid being misunderstood? When a man builds his life around avoiding danger, he becomes the kind of man who cannot handle life. And life senses this. Women sense it. Even friends feel it. The man becomes domesticated, and domestication is not the same as maturity. Domestication is the training of an animal to obey. Maturity is the strengthening of an organism to endure reality. The modern world rewards the appearance of sensitivity while punishing the reality of masculine clarity. It tells men to be vulnerable, but often offers no protection for the consequences of that vulnerability. It tells men to express feelings, but then judges those feelings through a non-neutral moral lens. It tells men to communicate, but then labels directness as aggression if it disrupts comfort. This produces men who speak in disclaimers, who apologize before stating opinions, who preemptively shrink. Nietzsche would recognize this as the triumph of the herd, the moral majority that defines goodness as harmlessness, and he would warn you that harmlessness is not virtue when it comes from fear. The herd loves the approval-seeking man because he is manageable. He does not challenge norms. He does not disturb the emotional weather. He is predictable. But the price of predictability is the death of the soul. A civilization full of approval-seeking men becomes one without creators, without builders, without warriors, not necessarily in the literal sense, but in the spiritual sense, men willing to endure hardship for something higher than comfort. Nietzsche's fear was not that men would become cruel. He feared that men would become small, that they would lose their taste for greatness, that they would trade the hard loneliness of self-definition for the soft warmth of social permission. And the dating market becomes a mirror of the civilizational fatigue. Women, as expressions of nature and strategy, do not desire the man who asks to be chosen like a charity case. They may date him for comfort, for resources, for stability. Still, deep erotic respect rarely survives in the presence of a man who is fundamentally trying to be accepted rather than trying to become. This is where men misinterpret women and become bitter. They think women are cruel because they respond to strength. They believe women are unfair because they lose attraction when the man becomes compliant. But women are not villains here. They are mirrors, and mirrors do not create your face. They reveal it. Here are lines you must tattoo into your mind, because they will protect you when you are tempted to kneel. A man who begs for desire trains himself to be undesired. If your self-worth depends on being chosen, you will accept conditions that destroy you. She does not kill your purpose, she reflects its absence. The attention economy does not merely distract you, it auctions your dignity to the highest bidder. The system will reward your compliance today and punish your emptiness tomorrow. If you stay blind, the cost is not just heartbreak. The price is a life that becomes smaller year by year. You will lose your mission because you will be too busy monitoring someone else's mood. You will lose your friends because you will become unavailable. You will lose your physical vitality because sleep will be sacrificed to anxiety. You will lose your edge because you will avoid conflict, and a man who avoids conflict becomes fragile, and fragility breeds paranoia. You will start to see betrayal everywhere because you know in your bones that you are not standing on solid ground. You will become a stranger in your own life, living in an apartment you pay for but do not inhabit. Nietzsche's antidote is not hatred of women. It is not a withdrawal into cynicism. It is not the performance of masculinity as theatre. It is sovereignty. It is the will to power directed inward, the refusal to live as a subordinate in your own existence. Now, practical integration, not cheap advice. As a shift in posture toward reality, notice the invisible pattern of emotional kneeling. Most men kneel without calling it kneeling. They call it understanding. They call it patience. They call it love. They overtext. They overexplain. They rush to repair tension as if tension is inherently dangerous. They apologize to buy peace. They adjust their schedule to remain available. They let their boundaries dissolve because they fear losing access to her. A sovereign man does something else. He allows tension to exist without panicking. He does not confuse discomfort with an emergency. He speaks once, clearly, and then he returns to his life. He does not chase replies. He does not perform for reassurance. He does not beg for clarity from someone committed to ambiguity. He treats his time like a sacred resource, not a currency to be spent to purchase affection. Notice the pattern of mission abandonment. Most men secretly put their purpose on hold when a woman enters the room. They do not announce it. They do not even consciously decide it. It happens through 1,000 small concessions. A workout was skipped, a project is delayed, and a night of reading is replaced by scrolling and waiting. The man becomes reactive, living by her availability rather than by his own path. A sovereign man refuses this transaction. He understands that his purpose is not an accessory to romance. It is the foundation of his masculinity. He continues to build. He continues to train. He continues to refine his mind, not to impress her, but because that is what keeps him alive. And paradoxically, this is what creates the only kind of presence that can sustain desire, a man who is going somewhere, with or without her. Notice the pattern of overexposed vulnerability. Modern culture tells men to share everything, to confess every insecurity, to make their inner world constantly accessible. Most men, desperate to be seen as healthy, use vulnerability as a plea. Please accept me. Please reassure me. Please prove I am enough. But vulnerability without strength is not intimacy. It is emotional dumping. A sovereign man is not emotionally closed. He is emotionally disciplined. He shares selectively, in the proper context, with someone who has earned access. He does not use his wounds as bargaining chips. He does not reveal weakness to manipulate comfort. He integrates his pain into his growth. Nietzsche would call this sublimation, turning suffering into power, turning chaos into structure. Notice the pattern of comfort addiction. Approval-seeking men often want to feel safe all the time. They want certainty. They want constant affirmation. They want reassurance like oxygen. They treat relationships as sedation. A sovereign man accepts that love involves risk, that desire requires uncertainty, that being a man means tolerating the possibility of loss without collapsing. He does not cling to comfort. He builds capacity. He becomes the kind of man who can withstand silence, withstand distance, withstand misunderstanding, without prostituting his principles for a moment of relief. And notice the most essential pattern: refusal to be disliked. Most approval-seeking men are terrified of being the villain in someone else's story. They want to be seen as good. They want to be seen as kind. They want to be seen as reasonable, and so they give away their authority, because authority sometimes creates friction. A sovereign man accepts a hard truth: if you stand for anything real, someone will dislike you. If you have boundaries, someone will call you selfish. If you speak directly, someone will contact you harshly. If you refuse to kneel, someone will call you arrogant. The approval seeker runs from these labels. The sovereign man lets them fall like rain on stone. Nietzsche's philosophy is a demand: become the one who defines. Become the one who creates value rather than begging for it. Become the one who can say yes to his own life, even if the crowd says no. Now, two paths open before you like a threshold in a dark corridor, and you will walk through one of them whether you choose consciously or not. If you ignore this, you will become older and quieter in the wrong way. You will keep repeating the same loop: attraction, performance, anxiety, chasing, humiliation, resentment, numbness. You will tell yourself you are unlucky. You will blame women. You will blame culture. You will call yourself cursed. But the curse will be self-inflicted. You will keep living as a man who needs permission to exist. 5 years from now, your body will be slightly softer, your eyes marginally duller, your ambition marginally smaller. 10 years from now, you will be nice in the way dead things are, nice, inoffensive, agreeable, forgettable. You will have relationships that feel like contracts, not like fire. You will have peace perhaps, but it will be the peace of surrender. If you answer this as an initiation, your life will become harder at first. You will lose people. Some will call you cold. Some will accuse you of changing. Some women will test you, not because they hate you, but because nature tests what claims to be strong. You will feel loneliness, because the herd always punishes men who step out of line. But 5 years from now, your nervous system will be calmer. Your sleep will be more profound. Your words will be fewer and more precise. Your body will carry a different kind of weight, not just muscle, but stillness. You will choose relationships rather than beg for them. You will accept rejection without bargaining. You will not chase what flees. 10 years from now, you will be less popular, perhaps, but you will be real, and the people who remain in your life will respect you, because you will finally respect yourself. This is the cost and the reward of sovereignty. It is not a performance, it is not a posture, it is an internal regime. A man becomes attractive not when he tries to be wanted, but when he becomes the kind of person who would still exist meaningfully even if no one wanted him. Now the final warning, because Nietzsche was not gentle with men who sleep through their own lives. The core truth is simple and brutal. When you live for approval, you become subordinate, and subordination is the death of desire. Not because women are cruel, but because life itself does not reward men who abandon their will. The mirror line you must face is this: she is not the judge of your worth. She is the instrument that reveals whether you have built any worth within yourself. If something in you recognizes yourself in this, do not treat it like entertainment. Treat it like a diagnosis. Keep this work alive, share it with the man who is quietly dissolving. Subscribe if you want more of this ruthless clarity, and return to it when you feel yourself reaching for approval like a drug. Become the man who does not ask to be chosen. Become the man who chooses his life first.